Auschwitz-Birkenau, former German Nazi concentration and extermination camp. The largest cemetery final resting place in the world. Over 1 million Jews, over 100,000 of Poles, Sinti and Roma, and Soviet prisoners of war. This is not an ordinary museum. Also because no other place saves items such as a broken-off toothbrush or an old suitcase. One of the most modern conservation workshops in the world operates in the former outbuildings of the camp. The remains of the death factory. Priceless and cherished evidence of the crime. Often the last sole remained traces of their owners' lives. Heaps of glasses, shoes, artificial limbs. There are no graves in this final resting place. The bodies of the murdered were burnt in the crematoria. Almost all that have remained of the victims are things that once belonged to them. Why almost? Because the perpetrators made an exception for those parts of the human body which they considered as goods. These photos show the hair found in the camp just after the liberation.
For the Germans, nothing could be wasted. The camp was not only a huge factory of death, it was also a huge profit-making enterprise. The SS sold hair to German companies at half a mark per kilogram, mainly for production of fabrics and felt. 2 tons of hair have survived to this day.
Hair are not ordinary exhibits. After all, these are human remains. Therefore, the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum does not allow filming them. There is, however, one exception. The intertwined locks of a woman and a man that are carefully preserved in the museum collections.
Edward Galiński was deported to Auschwitz in 1940 as a 17-year-old teenager and spent in the camp 4 years. That was for him this part of life when the person's character is created and the time of first love, first high feelings.
Mala was born in Poland in a Jewish merchant family, and at the age of 10, she immigrated with her family to Belgium. That is why she mastered many languages and therefore got the position of an interpreter and messenger between SS supervisors and prisoners. From the beginning, Mala and Edek felt sympathy for each other, and later a great love broke out. Once, she was to say to her camp friends, "I love and I am loved."
Edek and Mala decide to escape from the camp. To implement their daring plan, they are helped by none other than SS man Unterscharführer Edward Lubusch, who is a very special person. He helps various prisoners, and he provided the couple in love with an SS uniform and a pass. She disguises herself as a prisoner, carrying a wash basin over her head, while Edek pretends to be a guard. Polish prisoner Wisław Keller helps them as well, becoming an eyewitness of the escape. It is June 24th, 1944.
A good idea was with this bowl covering almost completely a small head of Mala. But Mala is bending under such a weight. Edek let Mala go forward, and he himself was following her at a few step distance, like an SS man escorting a prisoner. Step by step, they were walking away from the camp.
It was only at the evening roll call that the camp siren wailed, alerting about the escape. The chase began.
Mala and Edek were running to the mountains. After several days, she was arrested and Edek didn't want to leave her alone. They were put back in the camp in the bunker of the Block 11. Stories in Auschwitz rarely end with a happy ending.
Every evening, when the entire block was plunging into the quiet hours, Edek used to put his mouth into a gap in the door, whistling a beautiful, wistful melody. After a while, the same melody whistled by Mala returned through the tortuous bunker corridors.
Despite the torture, the lovers did not turn anybody of those who helped organize the escape in. Galiński was held in 6 different cells. There were inscriptions and drawings on the wall devoted to the love for Mala. July 6, 1944, is probably the last day the lovers were free. However, thanks to the help of one of the prisoners, they managed to meet again in secret. Then they decided that they would not let the Germans take them alive.
The roll call was coming to an end. There was complete silence. One could hear only gravel from under the shoes of Edek, the condemned man heading for the gallows. Edek breezed up the podium and immediately stood on a stool placed under the gallows. The loop was touching his head. The command sounded.
Achtung!
After a while, one of the SS men came forward, started to read out the sentence written in German. At this very moment, Edek, standing on the stool, found the loophole. He bounced off the stool with his legs and hung. He kept his word. No hangman will get me alive. Yet, the SS man didn't allow such a demonstration. The Lager Capo put his hands around Edek's waist, then put him on the stool and loosened the loop. The German finished reading the sentence. In the time of complete silence, Edek suddenly screamed in a stifled voice,
Long live Poland!
But he didn't finish. The camp remained motionless. A silent crowd of thousands of prisoners became blurred in the nightfall. There was dead silence. The entire camp was paying homage to the deceased.
Most likely on the same day, August 22, 1944, but in the women's section of Birkenau, Mala also kept her word. When she stood under the noose, she cut her veins with a smuggled razor. She hit one of the SS men in the face. She was brutally beaten. The dying woman was taken to the crematorium on a wheelbarrow. But how did the lovers' hair survive their deaths? Before the execution, Edek gave locks of hair to one of the prisoners, who then found Wiesław Keller.
Edek asked to give this piece of paper to you. Saying this, he gave me this paper folded into a small package. I checked the contents of that small bundle in the block. In the presence of Jankiel and the hairdresser. On the paper were written the surnames of Edek and Mali and their camp numbers. And in a folded wrapper, there was a tuft of hair, Edek's short hair, and the curl of Molly's golden hair. This time, all three of us burst into tears.
It is 1969. A prisoner of the first transport to Auschwitz, Wiesław Keller, number 290, a cinematographer after the war and the author of the best-selling camp memoirs Annus Mundi, gives the museum in Auschwitz a priceless souvenir. These two logs, the last trace of the life and love of his friends, a Jewish woman and a Pole, were hidden and miraculously kept in 5 other camps until liberation in 1945. The Arbeit macht frei Gate. Work makes you free, a noble slogan, the meaning of which the Germans had heartlessly distorted. However, many of the newly arrived prisoners had no idea about it.
No matter how funny it might sound, that gate built up our hopes. There was an inscription, Arbeit macht frei. Thus, labor camp? Well, let it be. Perhaps a factory. Those Germans have such revealing catchwords.
Work makes you free. This slogan greeted prisoners of several German concentration camps, starting with the first one, Dachau, that was established in March 1933.
Arbeit macht frei. It was the title of a short story published by the German librarian, pastor, and writer Lorenz Diefenbach in the 19th century. And the Nazis used this title cynically. In Auschwitz, work kills from early morning till late at night. Prisoners even created ironic rhyme. Arbeit macht frei durch Krematorium Nummer 3. Work will make you free through crematorium number 3.
Annually, over 2 million visitors from all over the world pass under this slogan. Do they know that they are not looking at the original one, but only a replica?
The infamous Arbeit macht frei sign was removed from the main gate to the Auschwitz
This was not an
concentration
ordinary theft.
To jest profanacja. Ktoś przychodzi na cmentarz I kradnie.
The most important symbol of Auschwitz and of the Holocaust was stolen.
Przesłuchujemy ludzi, którzy mają
The
informacje.
peace of over 1 million victims of Nazism was disturbed.
The perpetrators remain unknown.
Osoby, które dokonały tego aktu, wiedziały, gdzie idą I po co. Pytanie dlaczego, bo to się nikomu w głowie nie mieści.
On December 18th, 2009, the night was cloudy and moonless. It was snowing heavily. The cameras couldn't pick up anything.
It was still dark, my phone rang. Someone has stolen the inscription Arbeit macht frei. And my first reaction was impossible. You can steal, for example, a Van Gogh painting, but not the inscription from the concentration camp. Who could have done that? And for God's sake, what for?
The symbol of Auschwitz and the Holocaust recovered.
5 men between 20 and 39
Cała
years
piątka ma w tej chwili przedstawione
Law
zarzuty.
enforcement officers published
The
a video.
reason still remains unknown.
It was only a matter of luck that the inscription was found.
Unfortunately, the inscription is in a sorry state and needs expensive and long restoration.
The thieves were commissioned by a Swedish neo-Nazi. They came for the 5-meter inscription by car. To fit it in, they had to cut it and broke it into 3 pieces. the restorers faced one of the greatest challenges in their professional lives: to restore the world symbol of Auschwitz and the Holocaust to its original state.
The sign was in 3 parts, and all of that 3 parts were deformed. We know exactly that even a small mistake from our side can cause more damage, and it was a really big challenge for us.
The restoration works lasted over a year. They required specialized analyses and masterful skills. Today, the original inscription looks as if nothing had happened, safe in the museum collections. This, however, was not the first time that the inscription was in danger. Here is an extremely rare photo, probably taken in the late fall of 1945 by a former prisoner. One detail is very disturbing. Yes, there is no inscription above the gate.
In January 1945, the Soviet army liberated the camp, and Soviet administration provided help for survivors. However, special requisition troops began to confiscate everything that represented a certain value.
At the same time, Eugeniusz Nosel, a former prisoner of Auschwitz, returned to Oświęcim and got involved in the reconstruction of the city.
Going to pick up building materials on the Bauhof premises, there was a train loaded by the Soviet army. Various machines, lumber, beds, wardrobes, tables. On the side of that railway, there was tucked an emblem, Arbeit macht frei. MacArthur stopped at my request, and I asked, by the way, is there anything to buy back this emblem from the soldier guarding those rail cars, prepared to leave for the east? MacArthur gave him a quarter liter of moonshine vodka, and he had the authentic emblem taken out of the rail car.
Thus, one man saved the symbol of Auschwitz. To this day, it reminds us of the darkest crimes of this place, but also of heroic and admirable deeds. Auschwitz-Birkenau is also a story of solidarity and resistance. Let us look again at the Arbeit macht frei inscription. The inscription contains a mistake, and one does not need to know German to detect it. There is a reversed B letter. Coincidence? Or maybe a hidden message? The inscription was made by one of the first Auschwitz prisoners, Jan Liwacz, camp number 1010. He was a master of artistic blacksmithing. The capo, Kurt Müller, drew the inscription on the ground, and the work, under the direction of Liwacz, was conducted by prisoners in the camp's locksmith shop.
First, a bent tube was used to make the inscription frame, and then letters were carved out of a metal sheet. We welded the letters onto the frame.
Tendentiously, in this inscription, the letter B was placed the other way around. It's a kind of malice, which gave us a little satisfaction.
There was so little they could do to express their anger at the unimaginable crimes committed in the recesses of the extermination camp. Block of pseudo-medical experiments, closed to visitors on a daily basis.
I was nude, and they laid me on a black table. From the top, I was covered by a white window glass with a light. The light in that operating theater went out. Then an apparatus was introduced into my vagina. I felt a pain resembling birth throes. A small red lamp was on.
Before the operation, I was given several intravaginal injections. They were very painful. After an injection, I had shivering fits lasting as long as up to 12 hours. I realized I had been mutilated for life.
Who was the man capable of such cruelty? And why was he doing it?
Karl Klauberg, before the war, he was a well-known German professor of gynecology. However, that was his initiative to begin with such experiments in order to find a cheap and efficient method for mass sterilization of women.
From 200 to over 400 female prisoners, mostly Jewish women, were kept at this block. Dr. Klauberg injected a caustic chemical into their reproductive organs. They often resulted in death and an autopsy on the very same table. It's large enough for 2 dead bodies. Blood and bodily fluids drained through the opening.
In this block, a historical layout of rooms was preserved, as well as window and door carpentry, wooden and concrete floors, multicolor painting layers. We can talk here about direct touching the history. Each preserved element's piece of camp remains witnessed a tragic story of a certain person.
It was in this room where Dr. Klauberg performed his cruel procedures. It is a gynecological chair and a set of tools that only a few years ago found their way to the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum.
The instruments used by Dr. Klauberg were found by somebody around the memorial, but the majority of the objects that we receive, even after decades now, are coming from the families of survivors. Those families understand very, very well that those documents will be protected forever here, and they will participate in the history of this remembrance.
The gloomy railway ramp inside the Birkenau camp. The last stop before death for thousands of Jewish children, women, and men. Few will end up in the camp. Most will die in agony in the gas chambers. Everything that happens behind the gates of death is kept in strict secrecy. These are the orders of Commandant Rudolf Hess. And yet the events that took place on the ramp are known today, thanks to about 200 unique photographs. Selection on the ramp is almost mechanical. Children, the elderly, the sick, the handicapped, exhausted from their journey, pregnant women. All go to their death immediately. Dr. Josef Mengele is a symbol of this hell on earth. Known as the Angel of Death, his character became a dark legend. Some even say that while sending the children to the gas, he whistled his favorite tune. The SS men form two columns of people. Those capable of slave labor are sent to the camp. The others are deceived, told that they are going to bathe after their trip. Unaware of anything, the victims go straight to the gas chambers.
The very fact that these photos were taken and preserved to our times seems to be a miracle, but the circumstances of finding them are even more amazing. If it hadn't happened, nobody would have believed it. It was like 1 in a billion.
However, the story of the album's discovery begins not in Auschwitz, but in the German concentration camp of Mittelbau-Dora, 700 kilometers away from it. Soon after the liberation, Lily Jakob, a Jewish woman suffering from typhus, lies in bed in the former SS headquarters.
I had a very high fever. In the evening, I stretched out my hand towards a bedside table and came across an album over there. I was amazed because it hadn't been there before. Next morning, I took the album in hand.
In the photographs, Lily recognizes the faces of her neighbors and loved ones. Auntie with 4 children. Cousin Mendel. Grandma Schendel and Grandpa Abraham. And Lily's 2 brothers, Israel and Zedek. In a split second, the most horrible memories come back. It is May 26, 1944. A transport of 3,500 Jews arrives at the camp. Lily and her family get off at the ramp.
My father was pushed to the right. My brothers disappeared somewhere. I noticed my mother. When the SS man wasn't looking, I ran up to her. The German noticed us. He beat me severely and stabbed my arm with a bayonet. My bleeding was horrible. Then, in the bathhouse, I had my wound dressed, but I was alone.
An additional shock for Lily was the fact that in one of the photographs, she recognized herself right after her camp admission procedure. But let's take a look at another photo from the album. A photo that will become important on a global scale. Lily's 2 brothers on the ramp in Birkenau. Israel is looking straight into the lens.
When the museum announced a competition for a new logotype of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial, a lot of works arrived. But what dominated in the works were watchtowers, barbed wires, or prisoners' trials. Director Piotr Cywiński said then, "Wait a minute. After all, what is the most important is not here. There are no people." It was then that he decided to design a new logotype on his own. The eyes of the Jewish boy standing on the ramp in Birkenau became its central part. The eyes of Lily's little brother, who is looking straight into our eyes today.
After the war, for a long time, Lily Jakob could not part with the photographs. It was the last trace of her relatives' lives. But in the 1980s, she donated a priceless album to the Yad Vashem Institute in Jerusalem. In her memories, the ramp always remained the site of the most tragic moments of her life. However, for the Germans, the ramp was only a logistical tool.
What is the point of a factory's operation? It is to produce as fast as possible, as cheap as possible, as efficient as possible. And the same situation we have here in Auschwitz. The Germans need to deport hundreds of thousands of Jews from many European countries, very often distant countries, just to strip them of their belongings and murder them.
This is how the few survivors recall their deportation to Auschwitz.
It was a closed rail car to transport cattle. We were jammed. There was no space to sit down or to lie down.
We were parched. We were packed in more than like sardines. A kid was calling to me, "Water, water."
Crying, shouting, moaning. People were dying.
The train stopped, and the rail cars were unloaded.
Right from the very beginning of the planning of Birkenau camp, the construction of a new transport ramp was planned. At first, this project could not be implemented because of a shortage of building materials. In 1943, the then head of the Auschwitz camp construction department asked his superior, Hans Kammler, for 320 tons of iron necessary for the construction of a new unloading ramp in Birkenau. The problem was that for the whole of 1943, the entire Auschwitz camp received a total of 400 tons, and that in batches of 100 tons. The order was already hard to fulfill. Iron was a strategic raw material at the time and was primarily subject to military quotas. For over 2 years before the ramp inside the Birkenau camp was built, the transports of Jews doomed to extermination stopped at a completely different place. Both camps can be seen in the wartime aerial photo. Auschwitz I and Auschwitz II Birkenau. A railway junction and a siding are located between them. What happened in this place haunted the survivors for the rest of their lives.
There were some SS men with dogs and spotlights. They opened the door and greeted us with a beating.
People were surging towards the exit, numbed with fear. Tiny Mordechai was still in my arms, passed out and half dead. In one of those terrible moments, the child slipped out of my arms. I don't know when and how.
I took the hand of Nora, my wife, who was 8 months pregnant. In the other hand, I held my violin. Violent blows made me leave both of them.
Actually, the most of Jewish transports were unloaded here. In the years 1942 up to 1944, the Jews were received in this part of the Auschwitz railway station, which was originally construction material site for the expansion of the Birkenau camp.
However, the path the victims must travel from here is still a problem. The distance between the gas chambers and crematoria number 2 and 3 is about 1 mile. Old, sick, or exhausted people have to be transported by trucks. an unacceptable waste of time and fuel, not to mention the involvement of the SS crew. Therefore, despite the difficulties, a ramp is finally built inside the Birkenau camp. The path to the chambers is shortened to only 500 yards. The Holocaust is gaining momentum. There is a document confirming for certain when the first so-called Sondertransport, special transport, entered these tracks. It was May 16, 1944 at 1:50 p.m. The ramp was to be expanded. It was supposed to be roofed, and in fact there are plans from June 1944 showing the intention to build several roofed platforms in the unloading yard. And exactly 30 yards behind my back, there was supposed to be a building for the manager of this railway siding. In just a few weeks, the commissioning of the new ramp coincided with the decision to deport 430,000 Jews from Hungary. It was then that the photographs from the album found by Lily Jakob were taken. However, one more question remains. Who took them?
The authors of these photographs were most probably two SS men from Auschwitz camp. Chief of Erkennungsdienst, SS Identification Service Bernhard Walter, and his deputy Ernst Hoffmann.
Thanks to detailed analysis of the photos, there is a high probability that the SS men taking them have been identified.
Perhaps it is related to Bernhard Walter. As we know, after the evacuation from Auschwitz, he landed up in Mittelbau-Dora, a German camp, and he may have left the album in the SS quarters.
An additional clue is his name and surname written on the first page of the album. But in the history of Auschwitz, there is another famous photograph taken in the camp. In that photo, one of the prisoners smiles warmly. He's really happy. Margarita Ferrar from Spain, with her son Edie, is waiting for her beloved. It is March 18th, 1944. Almost 11 o'clock. From the side of the men's camp, Austrian prisoner Rudolf Friemel is coming. Because of a wedding, he was allowed to grow his hair. He has a tie and a suit instead of a striped uniform. Red roses were embroidered on Rudolf's white shirt by other prisoners. The camp orchestra is playing. Such a scene in the Auschwitz camp? How could this have happened?
We may find it hard to believe, but there was also a civil status registry of KL Auschwitz. It was placed in the barrack belonging to the Politische Abteilung, no longer in existence. The main task of the registry was to issue thousands of death certificates. Such documents had to be drawn up after the death of each prisoner registered in the camp. A single death certificate presented the basic personal data, as well as the date and hour of death, and its cause.
Murdered and tortured prisoners usually had a false cause of death entered. Stroke, pneumonia, kidney inflammation, or sepsis. But for one and only time, the registry office in Auschwitz became a place of love and happiness.
Rudolf
Friemel was Austrian. Before 1939, he found himself in Spain, fighting in the Civil War. There, he also met a woman, the beautiful Margarita, whom, after some time, he married. Unfortunately, the Third Reich did not want to recognize this marriage. That is why Rudolf's father asked Heinrich Himmler himself to remarry the young people in Auschwitz. He received the positive news surprisingly quickly. The wedding ceremony is limited to signing the papers in the presence of witnesses. Then the newlyweds and their son go to take a souvenir photo. The SS allows Rudolf and Margarita to spend the night in Block 24. They have to say goodbye in the morning.
In the fall of 1944, the camp resistance movement, Poles and Austrians, organized a daring escape. A group of prisoners was supposed to hide in a car that was taking dirty camp clothes to the laundry in Bielsko.
This escape, though carefully prepared, ends tragically. An SS man, who had been bribed to take the prisoners away, went directly to Block 11 and handed these prisoners over to the Gestapo. He also gave the names of the people who had bribed him. One of them was Rudolf Friemel.
On December 30th, 1944, the last execution took place at the Auschwitz I men's camp. On the gallows, among others, Rudolf Friemel. It all happened on the day when the approaching Red Army was already heard, when liberation was at hand.
But in the archives of the Auschwitz Camp Registry Office, there is one more extraordinary document. It relates to the ramp and Lily Jacob's album.
Some years ago, I looked through the death certificates of kids born in Auschwitz who died there very soon. I suddenly came across the death certificate of Dieter Walter. I knew his very sad name. I looked at the father's data and all was clear. It was Bernhard Walter. Probably the author of these photographs, SS man from the camp garrison, the chief of the SS identification service. His newborn son died a few hours after birth. How come that a man who experienced such a tragedy, the death of his own kid, was able to calmly take photos of Jewish kids who were killed in large numbers in gas chambers?
In the history of Auschwitz, there was a prisoner who dared to be German himself in order to get a slice of bread.
A large group of prisoners gathered in front of the camp kitchen. One of them ran up to me and shouted, "Teddy, do you want a slice of bread? Among us there is a German boxer. I'm looking for someone who will fight and beat him." My weight was 42 kilograms, but I decided to fight at once.
It's Sunday, a day off, March 2nd, 1941. The German couple, Walter Dunig, warms up before the fight, a powerfully muscled blonde. He was sent to Auschwitz as a criminal. For fun, he boxes with exhausted prisoners. He has already broken the jaws of 2 of them.
A pre-war middleweight boxing champion in Germany. You can see the broken eyebrows. You can see his crushed nose. Professional boxer.
Opposite, Tadeusz Pizzikowski, Polish political prisoner. Sent to Auschwitz in the first transport in June 1940. Before the war, he boxed under the name Teddy, a great talent, Warsaw champion in bantamweight class. The rivals are both 5 feet 7 inches tall, but a well-fed Düning weighs 150 pounds. Friends are afraid that Pizzakowski will be beaten to death. German couples are looking forward to bloody entertainment.
Everyone around is crawling. Teddy's gloves are put on. These are ordinary working gloves, additionally stuffed with racks, which were supposed to give the impression of these boxing ones. And from that moment onwards, everything changes.
Düning simply wants to beat the hell out of Pizzakowski. Before the first blows are thrown, Teddy, following the rules of fair play, extends his gloves in a greeting.
The square becomes a ring. The prisoners standing around suddenly stop laughing. The first round begins.
Düning attacks furiously, but Teddy is a master of dodging and blocking. The Germans' powerful blows hit either the air or the gloves of prisoner number 77. The first round ends in a draw.
Where does he get his strength from? We don't know. The second round starts. Düning begins to hit stronger, but Pizzakowski resists this attack and delivers blows by himself. His straight left followed by left side winders, then an uppercut and the first blood. Blood starts flowing from Düning's nose, and Pizzakowski does not attack. Düning throws down his gloves and says, "Guter Junge, a good boy."
Hit the German! Hit the German! Hit the German!
After hearing these shouts, the German capos want to beat the prisoners, but after a while, as if embarrassed, they give up. Düning gives Pizzakowski half a loaf of bread and a piece of meat. In the camp, this is more valuable than gold.
Since then, Pizzakowski fights dozens of times. Only one fight he loses. He fights above all about being able to share the bread earned from these fights with his campmates. After some time, he is transferred to another camp, where he also fights, and he takes a unique item with him, these boxing gloves.
Dozens of years after the war, one of Pizzakowski's gloves was placed at the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial. Here, it is carefully preserved as a sign of the prisoner's relentless spirit and resistance. But how did Teddy get real boxing gloves in the camp?
The answer is the word Canada. Warehouses of things taken from murdered Jews, from where most likely these gloves came from. And those gloves were like a symbol of justice and compensation for all this enormous harm.